and there may be a healthy person. Each one undergoes experience. The experiences may be different, but all those experiences can be had only through the sense organs as perceptions. When these perceptions come and touch the mind, they give us happiness and pain. Perceptions touching the mind are responsible for causing happiness and unhappiness. Now, since we are in this life, since we are associated with mind and the world, that means we are undergoing both happiness and unhappiness alternately. One thinks one can avoid pain to have pleasure alone. He leads an extrovert life, trying to earn more and more, thinking that material prosperity will give him happiness. He thinks he can derive happiness by engaging himself in all sorts of enjoyments, little knowing that any pleasure what we may get in this world is always wearing a cup of sorrow. If we carefully observe, we find that happiness itself is a progenitor of unhappiness. See? For when the happiness leaves, it creates unhappiness. Any happiness, even if extended for a long time, ceases to give us happiness and turns into weary unhappiness. So, it means to have happiness alone is impossible. Secondly, unhappiness cannot be avoided. Neither happiness nor unhappiness is a permanent feature. Happiness and unhappiness are in essence the same. Knowing this, one who wants peace of mind must learn the technique to outlive or transcend both happiness and unhappiness. This transcending of happiness and unhappiness is what is called in Sanskrit term samabhav. That is equanimity. That's very important. If we try to establish ourselves in that mood of equanimity, then we are in a wonderful state. So true spirituality means cultivation of equanimity. People tend to misunderstand this term. They interpret it thus: whatever there is in front of you, milk, sweets, or some inferior quality of stuff, treat them in the same way. Again, suppose there is in front of you a man, a woman, a king, a beggar, or a leper. Treat them in the same way. This is external, artificial equanimity. And it is meaningless to develop such a kind of equanimity. Even a realized sage, take for example, suppose he is given some sweets and some inferior quality stuff. What will he do? He chooses good quality sweets and rejects the inferior ones. So it means what? So we have to conclude that real equanimity means internal equanimity. Whatever our experiences are, in whatever way the world affects us, it can give us only happiness and unhappiness. We should be equanimous towards happiness and unhappiness too when it strikes our heart, the inner center. That is real equanimity. It is internal and not external. Each and every one of us is capable of developing it. It's a state where we will not be touched, we will not be shaken, we will not be affected. When we are hit by happiness or unhappiness. Suppose a man is affected by a sorrow. He usually says, "Oh, it is my fate. It is giving me all this misery. It is my prarabdha. I am just not born lucky." Like this, people give expression to their suffering. Once he cultivates equanimity, then what happens? The fate, the planets or the destiny can do nothing to him. They can only perhaps affect his physical circumstances, but inside he will be calm, he will be serene, he will be peaceful, he will be cheerful. So insofar as happiness and unhappiness are created by outside objects or persons like friends, relations, employer and so on, what we should do is that we should cultivate equanimity first. Let us take an example. Suppose somebody scolds you, abuses you, insults you, hurts you. Until yesterday you were affected and hurt, but not now. It had its reaction for a few days maybe. Do not be affected. This is the first step towards practicing equanimity in the life. How to have that attitude of equanimity when you are being abused? You must reason out yourself that infinite principle is as much in the person who scolds you as elsewhere. If I start regulating the whole world and wait for the whole world to become perfect before starting to make myself perfect, it would be just a wild dream. It can never be. In this imperfect state of affairs, the wise thing would be, let me become perfect. Suppose there is a man who wants to go to the river to take bath. He must know how to swim, otherwise he will be drowned. Whereas if he knows swimming, he will come out refreshed. Not only he had a nice bath, he finds totally relaxed. So also we must know how to swim in the ocean of this life of the world. So swimming in this life gives you real happiness, real relaxation, real joy. Then we can come out with a refreshed mind and refined awareness. So that means we should change our attitude right now. Once you know what is to be done, immediately try to do it. That's the way of cultivating equanimity. Let us take an example. There is a person. He may have a partner who is sick. He goes to God, prays to Him, "Oh Lord, what have you done? My partner is always sick. Give me a healthy one, at least in my next birth." So, what happened in his next life? He gets a healthy partner, but he is dominated too much by his partner. Then again he goes to God, "Oh God, give me a good spouse. So next life, he finds having a very good wife, but alas, she dies very young. And again he goes to God and pray, "Oh Lord, give me a partner who lives long, who is full of virtues and attainments." So where is the end? Do not go on lengthening the chain of your births by unending, unsatisfied desires. However perfect the external circumstances may be, you can never get abiding joy from them. So what we should do is, we must use the present set of circumstances as a stepping stone to evolve higher. That means we have got wonderful power of discrimination. Because we are not using it, it has become blunt. There is a famous text written by Shankaracharya, Viveka Chudamani. It deals with that subject of discrimination very thoroughly. If you have not gone through it, please read that book. It is scientific, rational, highly analytical. Now, let us apply that discriminating faculty and try to analyze the things. When he has a sick or a wife suffering from some mental problems, he thinks to himself, I thought she will be giving me happiness, but it means I cannot get happiness that way. She is not able to give happiness that way. On my part, let me take care of her and do best for her. That is my dharma now. Oh, she is sick, she is mentally deranged, so let me divorce. No. That's not the thing. Once you have accepted a partner, that means you have willingly committed yourself to live with the partner, and therein comes dharma. How you have to behave in circumstances not favorable to you. Let me do my dharma, that is, without any expectation. Let it teach me that the world as such cannot give me an iota of joy. This is the way to reason and analyze our life. This ought to be the attitude of a person going towards perfection. Suppose you go to a market. Whenever you go and buy a thing, generally you bargain. The moment you start bargaining, the vendor, he abuses you. You feel hurt. But if you feel hurt, that means you are defeated. You are no more able to bargain, and you will have to pay whatever he tells, and you pay it and take it away and get duped. The other way is, don't get upset. If you are not affected by the abuse of the vendor, he stops abusing you anymore. Oh, this person is like that my abusing will not have any effect upon him. So if I keep on abusing, I may lose my customer. That's the way. In fact, it happened in my own case. When I was in Bangalore, I was in charge of the students' home. 100 college students were there. I would go for shopping every week, 4 days in a week. So I would go to vegetable market, and there are so many shops, side by side. Everybody is shouting, please come, please come. These are the things, whatever you want. He knows I require bulk quantity. So suppose he says $10, I would say, can you give me for $2? What? From where are you coming from? He would start abuse. So they found out. Once or twice they abused and I was not affected. I took it in a sportive way. True, you may give the same vegetable for $10 to somebody else, but I can't pay you $10 and take this. Simply say, if you don't want to give, I will go to next shop, that's all. So he looked at me when I answered. I did not took that as insult at all. Just on the surface of it, I just rejected it. And next time onwards, he never abused. And he would call me, please come Swamiji, please come. Because I was not having Gerva cloth at that time. I was in the white dress. But even then they know, because I was coming from ashram, they know I am the Swami. So, and they would say, Swamiji, please come and take, but don't tell whatever price you are giving, because I will lose the other customer. He will pay more money. I will get more money from him. Like that he would reconcile himself. Anyway, I am giving you my own example to tell you how to face these situations like this. People act emotionally in a very intemperate way. It doesn't mean that we should react in the same manner. So, we should be a true Vedantin. We have come to Vedanta. What is the meaning of coming to Vedanta if you don't practice certain things, certain values in life? We are upset for everything. For small things, we become terribly gone out of the way. No. Knowing that the infinite principle is expressing itself through the person who is abusing you, you must, just as it does through you, transcend and outlive your wounded vanity. So how to do that? There's a way of doing it. Everything has got a way, If you know the way, it's very simple. If you don't know, it becomes complicated. So we don't know how to live in this world, so it has become very complicated for us. If you know it, it is very simple. To know the simplicity of it, you must come to spiritual life. That means whenever anything happens to you against your wish or events happen, take it that he is a teacher teaching you equanimity. Unknowingly, he is helping you in your spiritual development. If you can remain unaffected, even under any provocation, know that you are making progress in your spiritual journey. Let us take another example. Suppose you and your wife are just leaving your home and about to go to attend some sport event. Just at that moment, unexpectedly, a friend comes there. He has come just to see you, just to be with you for maybe for a few hours. Now, let us study this situation. He has come. He has interrupted your plan. That is true. But what you have to do now, your unavoidable duty is to offer him hospitality, to extend your love and courtesy. If you are able to do that without a pang of regret, without painful thoughts of what you have had to forego on account of him, without cursing him inwardly, then it shows you are progressing in the spiritual journey. Thus we should take every happiness and unhappiness that occur in this world in the attitude they are helping us more and more towards equanimity. Thus each and every experience in life should make us judge ourselves. Am I able to keep my equanimity instead of being a petty creature, getting pained at every bit, at every hit we receive from the life? We must decide, I am not going to let these things affect my mind anymore. Suppose you are in the marketplace, in a crowded bus, in the office, at work or anywhere. Whatever be your experience, whatever dealings the others met out to you, each experience you must use for transcending happiness and unhappiness. You must consider that each and every incident is a lesson in Vedanta. It's a lesson. Each person you come across is giving you a lesson. Your friend may criticize you. Ordinarily you would have been hurt, but now you will consider him as a teacher, because he is giving you an occasion to outlive the pain of criticism and increase your equanimity. Your child may fail in his exam. Previously, what you would have done, you would have become upset, you would have become sad, you would have become angry at the child. But now you behave in a different way. You just pacify the child for his failure. But at the same time, you make the child understand why the child has to fail, for what reasons. So you must explain this situation in such a way to the child, it should touch the mind of the child. One thing we should always remember, equanimity does not mean passivity or callousness. You must handle the child with calmness of mind. So also, in all your worldly activities. Sometimes you may have to put on a mask of anger in order to get the things done properly, but have equanimity within. Don't have revengeful attitude. Don't try to have vengeance. So far, we have dealt with transcending happiness and unhappiness as far as they are caused by the external world. Here, this outside world gives you an impression which you receive through your senses, and it creates a reaction in you of either happiness or unhappiness. This kind of happiness and unhappiness can be easily transcended with steady spiritual practice. There is a subtle type of happiness and unhappiness which is more difficult to outlive. Of course, this example which I am going to give you now, this example I gave in my class yesterday also. But this example is very relevant to the topic of today, so I am giving the same example now also. There is a wife who loves her husband sincerely. She starts imagining all sorts of accidents which her husband might be involved in when he does not return at the usual time. She gets worried. What happened? He would be back every day by 5:30 evening, but 7 o'clock still he has not come. Should I have to call police? Should I have to inform? Etc., etc. She is agitated, she is depressed. Here, previously I dealt with the things outside. Here no sense organs are operating. No external objects are troubling her. It is pure imagination running helter-skelter. These imaginary unhappiness give much more pain than physical unhappiness. Right thinking coupled with equanimity will remove this second type, for this unhappiness is hypothetical, imaginary, and not real. Suppose we are in deep sleep. There are no thoughts. As soon as we are awake, the flow of thought starts. Different thoughts bring happiness and unhappiness in varying degrees. Small bits of thoughts often do not give us any particular happiness or unhappiness, stress or tension. It is only applied thoughts, thoughts in which we give mental expression to our worldly attachments and thoughts pertaining to things from which we try to get joy and happiness. That creates stress and tension in us. Let us take another example. There is a mother. She has sent her only son for higher education, for some specialization, to a far-off country like Germany. She herself has sent her child to Germany so that he can prosper well in future. And she knows very well that the child is bright enough to qualify himself in the specialization. But then, all right, he has gone. But is she peaceful now? Is she happy now? Mother? No. She worries about him night and day. Every day she wants to call him, she wants to talk to him, then only she may have some kind of happiness. Even then, she is not really happy. Because of some kind of attachment that has developed between herself and her child. Now, let us try to analyze it further. What happens in the case of attachment, particularly in this particular case of mother and the child? Her mind goes out, reaches out, issues forth to an object which is beyond the comprehension of her senses at the moment. Her worries are purely imaginary. She expects her son will give her happiness if he is with her. And if he is not with her, she will be unhappy. In this kind of happiness or unhappiness, the mind projects, goes out to something away from us. As long as the son is in Germany, this stress is there almost constantly. Sometimes it may be less, sometimes it may be more, depending on how many other thoughts she is entertaining in her mind. When the son writes that he will return soon, he has finished his specialization, she is comparatively happy. The projection of her mind is reduced a little and her stress is reduced thereby. Well, when her son returns on the appointed day, the projection is completely withdrawn. Now she is happy. But even then, it's a temporary happiness. Why? The very next day she is unhappy. On another score. What is that? Maybe her son did not like the food she had prepared. Maybe the child did not eat well as she wanted him to eat. That means the mind is projecting out again. The mother was thinking all along, previously, I am unhappy because my son is away. If her contention had been true, she should have been perfectly happy once her son had returned. Why she is unhappy now? It is a constant recurring misunderstanding in us that we are happy or unhappy because of the external world and circumstances and the things outside. But the truth is that as long as our mind is projecting outside, issuing forth away from ourselves towards the objects of the world, we are subject to worries and anxieties. The moment the mind is withdrawn back to ourselves from its projections, we are contented and happy. In sleep, in dreamless sleep, you are so happy. After waking up, you feel you are so energetic. You feel totally relaxed. The whole day gives you an impression of happiness. How was that possible? Because the mind was totally withdrawn. So you could have that kind of relaxation. That means mind without projection is having equanimity. That's the truth. The secret of true happiness is, therefore, a non-issuing forth, non-projecting mind. This projection, why it is caused, why it is happening? It is caused by raga, dvesha, bhaya. These three. What are raga and dvesha? Raga, it's a Sanskrit term. It is a tendency in us to go out for external objects to get satisfaction. That's called raga. Dvesha is a tendency to avoid things which give him displeasure. Raga is what makes us say or feel, I want this, give me more. If you say, I want happiness, that's also raga. Anything that you desire also amounts to raga. Dvesha makes us say, I don't want this, take it away from me. I do not want unhappiness, is also a feeling of dvesha. Now, let us take an example. Give a candy to the child. What will happen? It will put its tongue immediately out and try to get more and more, thus expressing raga. It immediately cries. Why? It wants more. Give me 2 more candies. Give me 1 more chocolate. Now, take the other thing. Give the child something very bitter. It will spit it out. Just doesn't take it. This is dvesha. These 2 features are congenital. They are with us right from our birth. Raga and dvesha, they exist in all the beings. Lord Krishna says in the Gita, chapter 7, Ichchadvesha samuthena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani sammoham sarge yanti parantapa. From their very birth, all the beings are deluded by bewitchment of the pairs of opposites, like pleasure and pain, spring from the instinctive feelings of attraction and aversion for them. Attraction, aversion. Raga, dvesha. Attraction, raga. Aversion, dvesha. How do the forces of raga and dvesha affect man? They make him selfish. Raga and dvesha. How? Propelled by raga, he wants to grab things from others and accumulate more and more. Dvesha makes him dislike and hate some things and persons. Raga and dvesha are at the root of all the crimes, all the sins. For we commit sins only out of selfishness. Brothers fight, father and son fight, neighbors fight, nations fight. If you go to the root cause is always selfishness, which arises out of raga and dvesha. So, these raga and dvesha, attraction and aversion, they are settled in our heart like dirt. The heart is tainted by raga and dvesha, attraction and aversion. So, If we have to evolve spiritually, if you have to go forward in your spiritual journey, you must remove those raga and dvesha. That means you must make your heart pure. So if we try to get rid of raga and dvesha, that helps us immensely to cultivate samabhava, equanimity. You must get rid of raga and dvesha, then your mind settles on equanimity. Equanimity is a state of tranquility. As long as raga and dvesha rule over us, as long as we are under the grip of attraction and aversion, our minds always issue forth, project out, seeking fulfillment of our likes and dislikes. When raga and dvesha reduce, the mind is withdrawn back to ourselves. Mind without projection enjoys equanimity and contentment. We